Good morning. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note that any website or email that I mentioned will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business licensing assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center at City Hall or call 312-74-GO-BIZ. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn about the program, please visit chicago.gov/businesseducation. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. I will post the mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use a chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar will be Cybersecurity for Your Business, presented by the City of Chicago Information Security Organization. Turning it over to Albert.
Good morning, everybody. Let me know if you cannot hear me. I'm Albert DeZenzo, and I've been with the City of Chicago's Information Security Group, also known as the ISO for short, since December 2020. And most organizations, business organizations, especially ones that are quite large, have an information security group. They work in many different ways. One is keeping the data security actually secure of a business, and also working in governance, risk, and compliance for all matters of the business's data. And when I say data, when I say organization or business, I really mean organization. So if the City of Chicago has a pretty large group dedicated to maintaining cybersecurity of our own data, and as well as our vendors and customers' data. And today we're not going to focus so much on our actions here at the city, but we're also going to give a spotlight on some best practices for cybersecurity, awareness of risks, how to manage risks. And this can transcend both from your business data to your own personal data. So we're going to get into the presentation. Like it was said before, if you have questions or comments, please save them for the end, and we will be happy to answer them. The City of Chicago has its own built-in defense against manners of e-fraud, which is the Information Security Organization. The ISO is a dedicated team of professionals with varying scopes and duties, all within the umbrella of cybersecurity for the greater organization. The Governance, Risk, and Compliance Unit, also known as GRC for short, focuses on cyber policy, documentation, cyber attack resiliency training efforts for associates. We also heavily work with our legal group as well as in defining proper policy and proper data storage for data that remains in the City of Chicago. The ISO also has cyber fraud and attack prevention scopes as well, including risk management, network penetration testing, phishing tests, fraudulent email reporting features, and more essential cyber attack defenses. In this webinar, you're going to learn about all these aspects of our organization and how these can protect you and your business. So do your part, #BeCyberSmart. Did you know that the United States has an agency completely devoted to cybersecurity? Just like the Information Security Organization within the IT department of the City of Chicago, the United States government also has a massive operation for cybersecurity, CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. We call it CISA. But I'm not going to use the CISA, but we're going to call it CISA. CISA of the United States works to ensure security for many different platforms in a large variety of ways. Some of the CISA efforts include cybersecurity education at a national level, infrastructure security, including Wi-Fi network security, emergency communication and management, risk assessment and management of cyber communications and networks. So here's an overview of how CISA helps us and how we also at the city work with CISA. And the CISA organization, in conjunction with the National Cybersecurity Alliance, have encouraged municipalities like ours to engage their employees with further educational resources, and thus have created several topics that we're going to spotlight in today's webinar. Today, we're going to explore one of the NCA's topics, which you've seen in the header, how to secure your online life. And some of the subtopics we're going to explore will be basic cyber hygiene and risk reduction. Cyber hygiene applying to proper data storage. Phishing, meaning phishing emails and sometimes calls and the detection of them. Multi-factor authentication, which is becoming a rapidly deployed tool for authentication into sensitive data sets. Under risk reduction, proper passwords and usage, proper storage of HIPAA, which is personal and medical data. It's another topic for another day to explore HIPAA, but it's also very frequently known about how HIPAA is utilized at the organization level. It's not just for example, a hospital or for a medical community. It's for all organizations and treating personal and sensitive data with the proper tools and attitude, and also facts of cyber risks and breaches. So let's start with backing up your data. Make sure to back up any data you have on your computer onto a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM or network. The latter is mandatory at the City of Chicago. Even Google Cloud has wonderful storage for your personal data. Not only will this ensure that you will still have access to your information if your device is stolen, but it could help you identify exactly which information a thief may be able to access. You can take further measures to reduce the amount of damage that exposure could cause by also backing up your personal items on your personal devices, like I said before, to a cloud network host. An example, Google. Please keep all of your personal electronic device software current. Manufacturers issue updates as they discover vulnerabilities in their products. Automatic updates make this easier for many devices, including computers, your phone, your tablet, other smart devices. But you may need to manually update devices, especially older ones. Only apply updates from manufacturer websites and built-in application stores. Third-party sites, third-party apps usually are unreliable and can result in infected device. So also keep your smart device on Wi-Fi, and hopefully an encrypted Wi-Fi or password protected Wi-Fi. Public Wi-Fi has its own inherent dangers of network listeners. Network listeners can listen in on communications going between your device and to a data set, and can monitor and steal your own data. Many times public Wi-Fi can be found at hotels and airports, and it's just not the most reliable. We're going to get into now phishing, which is a very, very prevalent problem all over the world, but to be suspicious of unexpected emails. Phishing emails are currently one of the most prevalent risks to the average end user. End user is you. You are using a product and you're utilizing an email service. You are what the technical world calls the end user. The goal of a phishing email is to gain information about you, steal money from you, or install malware on your device. Malware can be, it's a large group of, for example, malicious programs or even ransomware where you do have to pay the attacker to get your data back or have access to your systems. Be suspicious of all unexpected emails. And if you are a City of Chicago employee on today's call, please forward them to Fish at the City of Chicago. I cannot stress this enough. Or use the Report Fish button in our MS Outlook's upper toolbar. So to recap, phishing emails, they're fake messages from a seemingly trusted or reputable source designed to convince you to reveal information, give unauthorized access to a system, click on a link, commit to a financial transaction. They're extremely common. They can have severe consequences, and quote, the devil's in the details. And we're going to get into why the devil may be in the details in the next slide here. So usually the subject line is something urgent. It's coming from a legitimate looking source. Please review the source. Many times there's something that could be just one letter misspelled. That's even becoming going away, because many times these spoofers or attackers can spoof an email address perfectly to look like a legitimate sender. Hover your pointer key over any sort of embedded links in the message to see if the website matches the description that is in the message. Most times it doesn't. Most times it has hallmarks of a completely different site, which is almost always malicious. We're going to now focus a little bit on multi-factor authentication, known as MFA for short. It's deployed at many places right now, including banks or even Facebook. Your usernames and passphrases are not always enough to protect key accounts like email, banking, and social media. Multi-factor authentication, also known as two-factor authentication, is a security feature that allows you to use two types of credentials when logging into an account. MFA can help fortify your online accounts by enabling the strongest authentication tools available, such as biometrics, security keys, or a unique one-time code through an app on your mobile device. Best example, Outlook has a good format for MFA where you can type in a number or a code that is texted to your phone if you are using Outlook, like for example, working remotely. MFA is offered by many application providers, and in some occurrences, it is mandatory, like in banking apps, online banking. So multi-factor authentication ensures that the only person who has access to that account is you. It is not someone else. And I know that it could be a little frustrating, but it does work in the long run. Let's focus a little bit on passwords. Most password systems have ways to get you to update your password periodically, but not all applications do. So try to utilize different passwords on different systems and accounts, not the same one, because should one get breached, that password can be utilized now to access other accounts by the attacker. Try to use the longest password allowed. This is somewhat standard now, but using a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers and symbols, this has become an industry-wide standard now where you are now required to utilize numbers, letters, and symbols, and also a dedicated password length as well, meeting a certain applications criteria. Reset your password every few months, especially on seldomly used applications or ones that are not held, for example, ones that are not mainstream, and use a password manager. They can be found from Microsoft, and they allow you to access your passwords in something of a logbook remotely. And now we're going to focus on sharing and sharing of data. I'm going to give it a little bit of scope for sharing data at work. And your data at work should simply be that, data that stays at work. It is extremely risky, as well as in violation of most HR policies, to misappropriate work data in any way. As mentioned before, your work data should be stored on a network drive. It cannot be stored in areas that are not backed up by, for example, if you are a city employee, by the city's network. This includes desktops, your personal email account, or on social media platforms. Your personal social media account should also not contain photographs of work data or your colleagues at work, the latter especially without their permission, as most social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram allow automatic, quote, geotagging, which is linking a post to a place. This action poses a safety risk to work data and personnel, as work data may inadvertently contain personal slash PII, PII stands for personal identifiable information, which is part of the HIPAA umbrella, and that includes things like addresses. It can include things like biometric data that can link things like height and weight to a person. In other words, sensitive personal data that we do not want exposed. It cannot be shared externally. Please see your HR rep for more information on what type of work data is actually allowed to be shared, especially externally. And then we're going to focus a little bit on geotagging as well. It is a feature, as we mentioned before, that's quite automatic on many social media sites. What many people don't realize is that these seemingly random details are all criminals need to know to target you, your loved ones, and even your physical belongings online and in the real world. Avoid posting names and phone numbers and addresses, school and work locations, and other sensitive information, whether it's in the text or in the photo you took. Disable the geotagging feature if it's automatically on your social media accounts, which can allow anyone to see where you are, where you aren't at a given time. And that is especially true if you, for example, are taking photographs, uploading them like things like Facebook and Instagram, and they may automatically geotag, for example, a school, a hospital. You run into massive risks with that, and that's a chat for another day. But the risks are inherent and pretty plain when revealing locations of not just sensitive persons, but sensitive data. Here are some stats that are a little bit sobering from the Department of Homeland Security. 1 in 3 homes are contain computers that are infected with malicious software. 65% of Americans who went online received at least one online scam offer. I think the number is higher. And worldwide, consumers have lost $358 in 21 hours on average per year dealing with online crime. Now, this is just individual consumers. We're not even talking about, for example, business organizations, which is far higher, and why organizations such as ours, the Information Security Group, exist. 47% of American adults have had their personal information exposed by cyber criminals. I'm sure many of us on the call have had horror stories of dealing with the aftermath of leaked data and trying to retrieve accounts and trying to clean up, for example, messy financial situations that have occurred after cyber criminals have exposed our data. 600,000 Facebook accounts have been hacked every single day. It is a well-known phenomenon that, for example, there could be a dead or rarely used Facebook account that is utilized to gain access or trust with you as a Facebook user. And the number one cyber crime is the imposter scam. As we mentioned before, things like phishing emails and more frequently fraudulent telephone calls, with 1 in 5 people reporting a financial loss. So we're going to draw to a close right now so we can focus on questions. And as this presentation draws to a close, we at the ISO of the City of Chicago would like to thank you for your time and attendance today at this webinar. And if you have any further questions in regard to cybersecurity topics, feel free to send an email to our general mailbox, information_security_office at cityofchicago.org. Thank you all very much. Okay, I am getting some questions in the chat right now. My name is Albert, by the way, Albert DeZenzo, in case someone was asking. And we can focus on, I think it's all right if we focus on questions today.
Yes.
Okay, first question I have is from Lisa G. Do VPNs, very good question, by the way, help with using public Wi-Fi, especially on the road for business? Yes. VPNs are also known as virtual private networks. Many times your laptop might have it. It is a great tool to utilize you can even get your own virtual private network, or you could use, for example, your organization's virtual private network services. You it focuses basically on the privacy of your network doings. So you authenticate into it. And from then on, you are basically hidden from, example, network listeners. And it's a great tool. Cannot stress it enough if you are working remotely. And Ben D writes, is there a difference between password managers? I used to use LastPass, but they seem to get hacked all the time. How to evaluate a good password manager? That is an interesting question. It may be that you will have to utilize actual reviews, especially on application reviews. Microsoft, I feel like there's Microsoft and Google are going to say the leaders are in their field right now for security actions, things that for example, LastPass I've never heard of, and to me that states that it is an adequate product, but maybe doesn't have the hardening of tools and applications that a more well-known brand would use. It's all in the reviews. I see a question from Araceli. We are opening a restaurant. What do we need to do in order to keep our data safe? Good question. McAfee should be installed on your personal devices, if not already. That allows for better security onto your own devices. Utilizing also well-known services, such as Microsoft and Google for storing data. They usually have very hardened security options for businesses. And if you are going into contract or working with, for example, a vendor, it is a best practice as well to talk to that vendor and see if they've had cybersecurity evaluations done, and ask them the following questions. Where do you store customers' data? What kind of customers do you have as a vendor? And what sort of programs are you using to store your customers' data? And you as the customer have the right to ask that. Even if you do sign, for example, a non-disclosure agreement, you still, as the customer, as the client, have a right to know where your data is being stored, because it has things that we talked about in today's presentation: HIPAA data, personal data, credit card information, lots more financials, possibly even insurance plans of employees. So there are many times, as I mentioned before, business packages that are very safe from larger providers, but also really keep an eye out on your vendors. Make sure your vendor even if it's a small one, has some sort of privacy practices in place to protect their customers' data, because that is where cyber criminals may tend to attack most often, are the little guys that don't pay attention and don't update. Peggy writes, my Facebook profile has been stolen and misused. What can I do about that? Unfortunately, that is something that is up to the Facebook administrators. You may need to see how many apps on your phone may have had an authentication from Facebook. And many times it's very easy to use Facebook as a way to get a new profile on any sort of app, like a dating app or a news app. You can use your Facebook credentials. You will have to file some sort of forensic claim with Facebook's administrators, and most likely change profile, not just change your profile, but change passwords in many different ways. And Araceli writes, is it safe to use Facebook as an advertiser? That is a question that's better posed for Facebook. I will say that Facebook's features for businesses don't have a very good filtering feature. And the best way to maybe keep your data safe would probably be to turn off comments on any sort of ads, which allows the least amount of interaction with any sort of malicious profiles or hacked profiles. So probably best to just disable commentary on any sort of ads that are hosted on the Facebook platform. It is a very trustworthy platform, and as we know, it's very effective. We see a lot of ads on it. David just posed a question. What are your thoughts about Twitter forcing users to pay for two-factor authentication and security for those who disable the feature but continue to use the platform? Do you think Facebook, Instagram, and others will follow? Very good question. The two-factor authentication, I feel, is becoming pretty much an industry standard right now. Payment-wise, I could see it becoming a paid service just because it takes an army of people to keep updating it. A lot of behind-the-scenes patchwork is involved in authentication programs and processes. And I can see it as a very lucrative business, but it's also one that needs quite a lot of time and personnel dedicated to keeping you, the end user's data, private in it. Do I think Facebook and Instagram and others will follow? Probably yes. Facebook's already done it. For example, I've tried to log into in my own experience. I've tried to log into Facebook from a different machine and had challenging time getting into it because of two-factor authentication. So two-factor apps are probably going to be the way of the future, whether we like it or not. Mr. Ben Duncan writes, Apple used to present themselves as, quote, unhackable. Do Macs and iPhone still have more robust security compared to PC, Android? Very good question. So Mac and iPhone, that operating system have very frequent automatic updates. Like I mentioned before in the presentation, try to stay on Wi-Fi with these as much as possible. They are designed as well that for frequent users. So I have two phones. Funny, you probably are talking to the right person. I have my work phone and my private phone. My work phone is an iPhone. My private phone is PC Android. PC Android allows a bit more flexibility, especially if you are a more savvy end user, to up the security on it without having to wait for automated updates to come down the application pipeline. And you can do that sometimes even without Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi should be done though. And then Apple products, for example, Mac, iPhone, it's needing to be on Wi-Fi. So traveling with these products and awaiting security updates to come down through the pipeline can be a bit of a challenge, and especially if you are traveling internationally. I've noticed that. But it is not the hardest process. Just make sure that you trust your Wi-Fi provider and have a pretty good one. Sharon wrote, thanks for the answer on VPNs last year. A few years ago, it was recommended by professional cyber experts, and that is correct. I've attended quite a number of webinars and seminars over the years. VPN is the way of the future. Hugo writes, what is your recommendation on what provider to use to perform pen testing? Can you go over pen testing just a bit so everyone is aware of it? Yes, that is a good question. Right now, I can't really give a good recommendation on pen testers because they're all different. And I know that sounds like a very generalized answer, but they all are different. So pen testing, we're not talking about pens or pencils, I mean, short for penetration. And a good organization, especially in the security side, will have a rigorous schedule of penetration testing, both internally and externally. It's a test to see if a third-party person can penetrate the network and how far they can penetrate the network. It's utilized in our own risk management, and any advanced organization and organization that employs a cybersecurity team should all have it in place already. And it should be part of any ISO, information security organization's service level agreement. And it's a way of risk mitigation and to see where any weaknesses lie in the network. There are many third-party pen test performers that can be hired, and I agree with the idea that a third-party pen test can be hired and should be hired at times to see if they can see weaknesses in the network that your internal pen tester may not see. But I can't recommend one. But it's something that you may have to, for example, look at reviews on or talk to people within the pen testing industry. There are quite a number of organizations, as it is a very high demand organization. I shouldn't say organization, but field, to the point where we've grown to hackathons, as you've probably heard. And they're held around the world, most notably in places like Germany and Las Vegas. Araceli, you wrote, how can I contact a vendor? That is a question you may want to write. Vendor is any sort of person that comes into contract with you and as a business owner. So if you are looking to, for example, harden your cybersecurity at your business via the vendor and finding out what their cybersecurity practices are, you may have to reach out to their human resources group or ask if they have an information security group. And you have the right as both a consumer and a client to ask if they even have a, for example, audit of their data, where their data is kept and how it's moved and stored. And you have the right to ask for audit to be performed. And audits are a very official thing and very helpful for you who's in contract with the business. Martina, you wrote, I have an AT&T account. However, I keep getting emails from them regarding my email account being canceled. Is there a way to stop this? I've contacted AT&T many times, but this is still happening. I cannot, unfortunately, answer this question with much clarity, as I do not work for AT&T and not very well versed in their email practices. You may double check where their sender is from to make sure it is legitimate, and speak possibly with the representative on the phone versus communicating electronically. Lisa, you wrote, how do you send confidential documents over email if the receiver won't accept a WeTransfer. It's an application for those who are not familiar with it. It's a sort of like money wiring application, I believe, or a similar link. For example, SBA required applicants to PPP and EIDL loans to send tax returns over email. How do I do this safely? Good question. Password protection. We talked about that before in our presentation. Password protection on most is actually enabled on a lot of email clients. It's encryption. If you utilize Outlook, there is a way to encrypt it. I'm not going to give a live demonstration of my own Outlook, but just go in the help box of your own Outlook or email provider like Google, and just type in encryption, and there'll be a step-by-step process of encrypting your email. So what happens is you once you encrypt it, you type a password comes into the email itself for the person that you're sending it to. They have to also use their own encryption password to decrypt the email. Otherwise, and if they don't have that in place, either they get one or they need to beef up their security practices. Araceli posed a good question. If we offer Wi-Fi to customers, who is in danger? We as the business or them as the customer? And I'm going to say both. It depends on the strength of your Wi-Fi. Many businesses do offer free Wi-Fi, which it's great. We've always used them, but a Wi-Fi service should be of the utmost security packages offered. So one that you do have to type a password in, not a free Wi-Fi in the sense that it allows anyone to log into it, because your business's neighbors, if they if it has a strong enough signal, can also utilize your Wi-Fi, and there are far more network listeners now on it. So any Wi-Fi for a business, as I mentioned before, that has a way to authenticate as you as a user, so not just the business owner, but as a customer or an end user, if you can authenticate into it with the password, is the best type of Wi-Fi to use. Like I mentioned before in our presentation, places that have Wi-Fi's without a password should be avoided. Low security, lots of network users. Lots of network users and network listeners. Hugo writes, can you explain a bit what a physical key two-factor authentication is? Ubico is a seller of these. What are your thoughts on them? Physical key is getting it's sometimes used in conjunction with electronic two-factor authentication. I don't encounter that very often in my professional line of business. I see it more often in private businesses, and I don't want to sound like an expert on that, but I noticed that there are a lot of private entrepreneurs that are offering it. And in this age of cybersecurity, just from my observations being in the field now for, 10 years now, I have seen a lot of growth, and I've seen a lot of hardening of security practices and a lot of standards. So these standards are, for example, NIST, National Information Security Standards, or ISO, and most of us who are in, for example, industries are familiar with ISO standards. We're not talking about Information Security Office now, we're talking about operating standards, international operating standards, which is a number that's assigned to a certain level of efficiency that a product or a service can meet. So I would evaluate a vendor, like you mentioned, Ubico, and see what sort of ISO standard they meet and what sort of NIST standards they follow to, because there are quite a bit. And if they can get into detail on that, they can, and they should be transparent, by the way, on what standards they do follow and to what extent. If they're transparent on it, you've got a good provider. Araceli wrote, we have a personal computer, but we are going to open a restaurant. Do we need a computer for the business? Yes, yes, and yes. Do not utilize your computer like a personal machine for business purposes, because as I mentioned before, you will have PII, personal identifiable information on your personal machine. Have a machine that stays at your business and is backed up to a business only, for example, cloud that has hardened security practices, because you will be storing not only customer data on there, but your employees' data as well. I know that there's quite a lot of convenience in things like tablets. You see things like, for example, restaurants with tablets, and everybody's got one for ordering. Great, but what happens to those tablets? Do they go home with the restaurant owners at the end of the day? And are they now subject to loss or abuse? So a machine that's designed just for you and utilized just for your own work is the best way to go. And thank you for the thank you compliments, everybody. Anybody have any further questions or comments? Right, Sandra wrote, what if you work from home? Do you still need a separate computer? That's a good question. And it depends on, you're going to have to ask yourself several things. What kind of data are you working with? And what does your employer allow? Some employers allow you to use your personal device so long as you utilize a virtual private network, VPN. And their organization, usually your works organization, can see if you're using a VPN or not when you work from home. And that's a good way for them to say, okay, this way, when she's accessing our data, our files are protected. If you find yourself that you are using, for example, a lot of data and it's taking up a lot of storage on your machine, or your machine is kind of older and it's not being supported as much in applications, or it's losing efficiency because of the high amount of data that your employer is giving you, it's recommended to switch to another machine, another computer to perform your tasks. You may want to inquire with your employer if they offer any sort of way to give you a machine. But if you're self-employed, for example, and you are dealing with high amounts of data, especially sensitive PII data, personal information, it may be better to use a separate machine, especially if you travel with your personal machine, which may have PII on it for some of your clients, or even your own PII, like, for example, your vendors, your accounts, etc. Kimberly wrote, what would you suggest to use for virus scans? Which ones are the best? There's quite a number of them now. McAfee is the standard one. It's the gold standard for a lot of built-in systems that you can get from your pre-built machines right away from, example, like Best Buy or etc. I think Google as well, their AWS services have really, really good options now for performing scans, and also for you can modify it as well. Google is a little bit more geared towards techies. I felt McAfee was kind of more for the average end user who may not be as well versed in such things. Hosts, we have a question. I missed most of the class. Will you be doing another one soon? We are actually, according to the host, we will be putting this on YouTube, and I believe our host will provide that information after the call is done.
That's correct.
All right. I'm seeing a lot of thank you in the comments.
You're muted.
I'm so sorry, guys. I said I see a lot of thank yous in the comments, and I wanted to say thank you as well for your rapt attention and your many very good questions and comments today. Very fruitful and very deep talk today. So thank you all. And I'm going to leave it back to our host. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert, for today's presentation. I hope all of our attendees receive the information that they were looking for today. Today's webinar was recorded and will be posted to youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Again, that's youtube.com/Chicago BACP. To learn about our upcoming webinars, please visit chicago.gov/business education. Again, that's chicago.gov/business education. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to BACPoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, that's BACPoutreach@cityofchicago.org. And thank you again to our panelists, Mr. Albert, for today's presentation, and have a great weekend.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining. Have a nice day.